So I'd like to apologize in advance, as this will likewise be rough like last presentation, though hopefully better audible. It is also going to be a little bit visually ugly because I'm still under the weather and I'm traveling next week to visit family, but I wanted to give a response today. And that means I'm literally using GIMP as a slideshow machine here. I'm going to do some video editing, so it's not too hideous. But Mr. Pope is a better video editor than me on any day of the week, and today is definitely not my finest day of the week. Leaving this would kind of stink because this is turning into a nice argument. And the nice part about a good argument is that if you win, the other dude now agrees with you. Yay. If you identify the clear points where you disagree and establish the legitimacy of both sides' arguments, you can be quite far from on the same page, but you've established so much mutual understanding that any possibility of antagonism is out the window. We don't have to be on the same page in whether we think a particular source is golden or garbage, any more than a longstanding acquaintance of mine will ever come to agreement on whether or not Andrew Jackson was a great president. Clearly, he was an appalling waste of old boar scrota whose actions, well, let's just say we disagree over that. And not merely cordially in the sense of being civil, but cordially in terms of we can be far from common ground and be utterly comfortable with that. I think that's where Mr. Pope and I are going to wind up in terms of visual interpretation. So rather than get into a who can reassort more firmly than who contest, let me simply run through why I consider my arguments to be legitimate. That does not mean correct. Correct is either for y'all watching and making your own judgments, or for one of us to say when we go, well, damn, that's a really good point. I'm with you on that. I think Mr. Pope is coming around to my position a little bit, and I liked his acknowledgement of Cold Steel's shortcomings. Unfortunately, I also think they're much more severe than Mr. Pope really admits, and I'll explain why here. In fact, one of the reasons I didn't do this in the original is that I wanted to be snarky and lighthearted, but not to dunk too hard on the man, because a lot of people lionize the guy. But fair warning, I'm not going to take the gloves all the way off today, but I'm going to loosen them quite a bit. First up, high octave. I meant it when I said I wouldn't contest it because it'd be a goalpost move. Goalpost moves are the single greatest cause of internet-related high blood pressure on the planet, second only to people who refuse to triple the amount of garlic in their recipes. If we're being a bit more discursive rather than argumentative, I'd say the problem is that it renders you highly vulnerable to redoublement or remise, particularly manchette play, as I referred to in my textual response. More on that later. And that since it's a partial elbow moulinet anyway, it should just be performed like Radaelian seventh with the hand closed, arching the back as needed to keep a firm grip. It's an extremely similar way of carrying out the parry, and it's far more secure. I disagree that its usage will be rare. A fencing using the 3-4-5 parry triangle, insert your specific regional usages here, is going to parry for and attack outside cheek on the regular. It's a very standard bread and butter move for what is arguably the world's dominant parry set. But that's a case of, hey guys, who do you fence with? We're likely to devolve into anecdata before we come to common ground there. One of the reasons I take Hutton more or less at face value is the quality of the artwork. It's insane. And by insane, I mean insanely good. It is extremely rare to find fencing artwork of this quality in a period manual. Happens, but not often. The artist is skilled enough to show how the fall of the soft leather cuff changes depending on the position of the wrist. Pretty cool. In fact, not just pretty cool, it's beautiful. And that quality is consistent through the manual. We also have the elbow position. Now, Mr. Pope may be correct about angulation issues. It may not be strictly tucked by the body, but if so, it's not far from because of the fall of the cuff and the depiction of the elbow folds in the fabric. If the elbow were carried far outside to the right, as Mr. Pope carries it, those folds would be facing the viewer or close to it rather than depicted up top. The artist is extremely precise about this stuff throughout the manual. I think I'm right. Mr. Pope thinks he's right. We're probably going to have to agree to disagree, and that's okay. The images for fourth are much the same. Note that I don't mind the rondelle style fourth, and I don't mind the rondelle style third, as I said before. If you interpret the parry that way, groovy. I do think the depiction of the parry should look like that, however, given that fourth is explicitly for the purpose of defending the inside cheek. And I think Mr. Pope may be coming around on the, hey, maybe this book really isn't for beginners issue, but I'll let him confirm or rebut that. In the meantime, let's take a quick peek to see what I'm talking about here for tiers. Look at the outline of that elbow guard. If you intuit the fold of his jacket, if it were facing you, and here we have a problem of sightedness, it's going to look very different. Look at the curve there. That is far to the outside. So I'm going to stand by my assertion that if his elbow, regardless of its forward or backwardness, were tucked much closer to the body, he'd have a harder time being safe. I could be wrong. That's cool. You guys who are watching this decide. So if you find these two images similar, you're clearly going to favor Mr. Pope's argument. I consider them very, very different. Could be boxing and Sabat bias creeping in. I've had a lot of stylistic training in being very precise about where I hold my elbows and why. If you look at this the way she does, you're probably going to disagree with me, and that's fine. You'll probably find my whole position pretty pedantic. That's okay. Similar for weight. As far as I'm concerned, these are very, very different creatures. Hold on, let me shift this up top. There. No daylight visible. Lots of daylight visible. Both side-on images, not 3/4. I consider this a big thing. On that score, I like Mr. Pope's modern foil parry argument. But unfortunately, it's the same perspective bias issues he's presented regarding my argument. Shift the viewer's perspective from straight on to a 3/4 view, well to the inside of the line of engagement, to the point where you can see the inner thigh. And of course, you're going to see space between the arm and the body. Or Hutton doesn't carry himself properly in guard. Look how much of the chest is clearly visible with very little foreshortening. Unfortunately, either of these is equally plausible. I don't know which to prefer. I'm not going to further argue Cat's parry. We're both ill, so I can't get us on camera. I'm simply going to ask Mr. Pope, for purposes of discussion, that an assertion with an extra camera view, these two parries would look very different. I can't back it up right now, and that's fine. Likewise, I'm going to pass on sixth. I consider it extremely vulnerable, specifically to manchette play. But this is a your mileage may vary situation. If you like false edge parries and saber and use them successfully, well, nothing argues like success. Now, I'm going to be a little bit pointed here in regards to high second. And I hope Mr. Pope will forgive me. But the argument isn't whether high second or higher hanging guards are more fatiguing than tiers, particularly Hutton's tiers, but whether they're excessively fatiguing. If the best argument to support Mr. Hutton's assertion is that it might be uncomfortable while you're injured, I believe I may be entitled to call QED on that one. The British Army didn't think it was excessively fatiguing. The Berliners didn't think it was excessively fatiguing, nor the Prussians, nor the Italians, nor the Austrians, nor the young ladies of Budapest. Said young ladies are training right and left-handed, by the way. Hutton's assertion here is nonsense on stilts, and I remain of the opinion that it seriously calls his credibility into question. As well, the redoublement against low preem. It's easy to set up a response and parry and riposte when you know what the technique they're going to attempt is. Mr. Pope, in my opinion, commits an accidental straw man here, or he just gets something incorrect. I don't know which it is because I don't know whether or not he's a foilist or has classical training. So let's unpack that. The continued attack against low preem is not the over-aggressive rushing in Mr. Pope suggests. This is not coming to grips. This is not closing. It's simply redoublement, recovering the lunge forwards and continuing the attack with a second lunge. It is performed by disengagement or by glide. Performing it by glide means that by definition, it can be performed while maintaining edge contact. If Mr. Pope's student couldn't maintain edge contact, that's fine, it's happened. My form fencing this last Saturday was terrible as well, but that can't be used to dismiss the technique itself. Parrying and giving ground, as Mr. Hutton suggests, does not buy one's safety. We wouldn't know that from Hutton's definition of redoublement and remise. Or, since Hutton claims familiarity with the Italian material, as well as lots of other material, to put it mildly, he should know that redoublement and raddoppio, same thing, is an action explicitly to be carried out against an opponent who parries and retreats. Hutton should know this. Any properly trained foilist knows this. I knew this before I finished my first year of foil. Why doesn't Hutton, if he's fluent with all the fencing names that he drops throughout the text? Hutton's definitions here for redoubling and remise are at best vague, incoherent, and incomplete. At worst, they're throw the book across the room into the fireplace while screaming profanities in French material. If I were to give Hutton's definition for a moniteur exam, I'd be failing that exam. For the record, since we're on YouTube, anyone watching this can easily take 15 minutes and find plenty of foil fencing examples confirming that this is Foil Basics 101. I believe the reason Hutton gets away with this is he's not primarily training military men nor competitive fencers, but is primarily known for teaching actors for the purposes of stage combat, in which case these actions aren't really all that important. There's a reason my stage combat book is called How to Look Kick-Ass with Swords, not How to Be Kick-Ass with Swords. But as a technical fencing manual, this is failboat. The more vicious critics of Hutton, and mind you, I am not one of them, answer that by saying Hutton was a poser. I don't think that's the case. I think he was legitimately experimenting and trying to innovate, but at this point in his career, he was simply out of his depth and didn't realize it. Find me somebody who's never been out of their depth. I'll show you somebody who didn't reach high enough. So, moving on. Is a remise vulnerable to an attempted stop hit? Sure, that's why feints, double feints, and the counter parry game exist. All bread and butter fencing. So, when I say friends don't let friends fence cold steel, what I mean is don't do it the way Hutton has written it. You don't want to give a beginner these definitions of redoubling and remise, for example, or those parries and let them flounder around. It may be a gateway drug, but they're going to wind up maltrained. Take the man off the pedestal modern HEMA has put him on, judge him by his own words, and see how he changes or doesn't change over time. It's far more respectful to Mr. Hutton and significantly more respectful to beginners who do not have the experience to make these distinctions. Fencing repaired Hutton, on the other hand, is extremely plausible, and there are people who really ought to be doing that. The text response I gave over on my community tab gives an example of how I'd go about it. So, thank you again, Mr. Pope. For those of you watching, have fun, go do the thing, and give aspiring Huttonists the swordsman and a droop discount on foil lessons instead. Thank you very much, Mr. Pope. I do think we're getting closer to really understanding each other's positions. I don't know whether or not we're going to agree, but you've made some really nice arguments. That was a really, really beautiful response. And even though my response is rough here today, the reason I'm making it now rather than 2 weeks from now is I didn't want to just let it linger. It really deserved a more timely response. Thank you very much. Looking forward to hearing from you again.
We've got more videos and content coming, so if you liked what you saw and it was useful for you, please stab the like button, /subscribe, and punch the little bell icon so that you're notified immediately when new content comes available. Thanks, and go do the thing.